It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, who is one of the founders of the Professional Speaking Association. As well as speaking about effective communication, he's written 8 business books on verbal communication, some of which have been published in 6 or 7 countries, which is fantastic. And for the past 20 years, he's been coaching business leaders in getting their points across. Today he'll be speaking to us about what it takes to meet our expectations. So please welcome the fabulous Phillip Khan-Panni.
Thank you, Nikki. Hello. When I was just a little boy, I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be handsome? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. She said no. And it was a bit of a disappointment because, you expect your parents to support you and tell you how great you are, even if you're not. It was an early example of my expectations not being met. Let me see what I can do about your expectations. Have a fortune cookie. Now, what have I done? I created expectations. The expectation of catching a fortune cookie. But I also disappointed some of you, those who didn't get one. So let me put that right by passing around a couple of bags of cookies. Please take one and pass it on. As speakers, you do that, don't you? You're opinion formers, you're opinion leaders. You create expectations and you meet them in a variety of ways. You have things to say, haven't you? Messages of enlightenment, education, encouragement. Things that can change the lives of the people who listen to you. But what about your own expectations? What are you doing about your own expectations? What are you doing about what can be expected of you? Now, I know speakers have expectations and aspirations. I know that because I'm often asked, what does it take to be a professional speaker? And I always reply 3 M's: message, messenger, and method. And I'll come to each of them in turn. I'm going to explain that by walking you through the process of preparing a speech on meeting expectations. And I'll relate that to the 3 M's. The title of the speech will be Because I Tried, and the thrust of it will be on trying to be the best that you can be. Okay? Now that's going to be the focus. And when you succeed, you should be able to point at your success and say, it's because I tried. So let me talk about these 3 M's briefly, first of all. The first M, as I said, was for message. Now, as Robert just said, content is not king. The message is not the content of your speech. It's the significance of what you're talking about. It's what you want people to understand and remember, take away from your talk. The second M is messenger. That's you. Why do people need to hear your message from you? Why is it you? Is it something that belongs to you, something that you feel passionately about, something you really, really want people to hear? That's what makes you the right person to be the messenger to carry that message. And the third M is method. That's about the skills and the techniques to put your message across effectively. Now, as I said, the title of the speech would be Because I Tried, and the thrust of it will be trying to be the best that you can possibly be. So, there are many considerations to include in that, but I'm going to concentrate on only 6. 6 which are represented by the acronym PATHOS. It's going to be about the message and the way in which you put it across. So, the P in PATHOS is for purpose. This is the focus of whatever you choose to do. I was struck by a quote from the athlete David Hemry, the man who smashed the world record for the 400-meter hurdles in the Mexico Olympics. And Hemry said, "When I crossed the finishing line, I didn't know I'd won. And then I saw the BBC man coming at me, and he put a microphone in my hand, and I said, 'Did I win?' And then Hemry said something really important. He said, 'It was always my intention to run a world record time rather than to win the race.' He said, 'Any runner will tell you you cannot control what anyone else does.' So the point he was making was it was far more important to concentrate on your own performance than on beating the opposition. Now that was profound because, as you know, in sport, the intent is usually just to beat the opposition. And Hemry decided his focus, his purpose, was to concentrate on the one thing he could control. And that was his own performance. So now, that has to be your core message. And that's what you need to put across to your listeners. Now let's think about the kind of message that you want to put across and where it comes from. So the A stands for authentic. You have got to be authentic. I was remembering a talk I heard given by a Buddhist monk who was trying to prepare a sermon for a non-Buddhist audience, and he was really struggling. His theme was going to be about finding inspiration in unexpected places. So he got together a load of books on the subject, and he was reading through them all, making notes of what he thought he could use. Does that sound familiar? I've known lots of people prepare speeches and presentations the same way. They get a whole load of books by other people on the thing, and they make notes and so on. And they end up in the same place that he did, with a load of unconnected quotes that he couldn't use, because there wasn't a single inspiration, not one aha moment. So the monk went to see his abbot and he said, "Listen, I'm struggling. I have this problem. I have this major sermon I've got to prepare. This is what I've done. I researched it to death and I've read all these books and made notes and so on. What can I do next?" And the abbot said, "You're looking in the wrong place. You will not find your inspiration in the works of others. Look within. Look inside yourself, and that's where you will find the answer to your quest." So the abbot did that. He looked within himself, remembered that as a young man he was a very ardent cricketer. So he turned up to deliver his sermon with a little child's cricket bat. And he told the story of a group of kids who were playing cricket in the grounds of their local church. And one young lad hit the ball, bang, straight through the stained glass window of the church. And of course the parish priest came out to see what was going on. And the boys were terrified that they were going to be told off at the very least. And the priest looked at that stained glass window and he said, "Thank you, boys. You've given me an inspiration." You see, the ball had broken through the stained glass window where there was a message that read, "Glory to God in the highest." And it knocked out one letter from the last word. And now the message read, "Glory to God in the high street." And the priest said, "Thank you, that's my inspiration. That's where I need to focus." So it worked for him, it worked for the monk, and it resonated with the audience. And why? Because it was authentic. Someone else who believed in being authentic was the late Steve Jobs. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and told he had only a few months to live. But he actually lasted a lot longer than that. But it really concentrated his mind. And he frequently said to himself, "If today were the last day of my life, would I do what I'm about to do?" That really focuses your mind, doesn't it? So let me ask you this. If you were to die tomorrow, would you want to be remembered for what you've done and achieved so far? Or is there more to come? If the best has still to come, as Robert would say, What's holding you back? And then Steve Jobs also said, your time is very limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drive out your own inner voice. That's about being authentic. So now we come to the T in pathos, and that stands for talent. 2,000 years ago, Jesus told a story about that. It's called the parable of the talents. A certain rich man was going on his journey, on his travels, and he called his servants together and he gave them each some money. To the first one, he gave 5 talents. A talent was a unit of money. To the second one, he gave 2 talents. To the third one, he gave 1 talent. And off he went. When he returned some time later, the first servant came up to him and said, Master, I've done well. You gave me 5 talents. I've invested it. I've doubled the money. I made 5 more. Here they are. And the master said, well done. I'll put you in charge of many things. The second servant came up and said, I too have doubled my money. You gave me 2 talents. I made 2 more, and here they are. And the master said, well done, come and join me. And then the third servant came up and he said, Master, I was afraid. Because you're such a hard taskmaster, I was terrified of losing the talent that you gave me. So I hid it and kept it safe. And here it is. And the master was furious. He said, you could at least have left it in the bank and I would have gained some interest. The man had wasted the opportunity. For 2,000 years, the message has been how important it is to make the most of the opportunities and the talents that we've been given. So what can you do, and why should you try? There's a widespread condition I call the curse of talent. It's when you have high intelligence and natural ability that allows you to get good results without trying. I'm sure it's a condition that affects many people in this room. And people who are affected by it say, why should I make the effort when I can get good results without trying? Well, only the other day I was reading an interview by Danny Alexander, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And he said when he was at Oxford, he did very little work until the last minute, and then he did only just enough to get his degree. Now that resonated with me because that's exactly how I was when I was a student. I never did any work. I always got good results without trying. So in frustration, my final year class teacher wrote in a report to my mother, this boy could be first if he only did some work. So why didn't I try? I told myself that I could always be in the top 5 without doing any work. Why should I work, make the effort just to gain a few places? But secretly, it was something else. You see, the curse of talent is when you're afraid to put your talent on the line in case you fail. And in case you discover that you're not as good as you thought you were. Now, my best natural talent is writing, but it took me many years before I committed to myself to seeking a career in writing. And even longer before I wrote my first book. And I brought it along just to show it because I'm very proud of that book. And I've now written 7 others. And so, why did it take me so long? Well, in my late 20s, the editor of the Evening Standard saw some promotional pieces I'd written in the paper. And he invited me to become one of his feature writers. I turned him down. I'd always wanted to be a journalist, and here was a golden opportunity presented to me on a plate, and I let it pass. Why? Because secretly I was afraid that others might not think that I was as good a writer as I thought I was. So if you've got a talent, don't leave it on the back burner as a fallback option. Put it to the test. Use it to make yourself the best that you can possibly be. You've got to do that. You've got to try. So we come to H. And that's for humility. It came to me in a rather unexpected way. When I was a teenager, I used to run a bit. I was pretty good, but not exceptional. But when I was at university in Calcutta, I decided to enter my college's sports day. Now, I wasn't doing any regular running, but I put my name down for the mile and the half mile on the same day, which just shows how little I knew. I thought I would just turn up and give it my best shot. The mindset of the dilettante. Now, the standard in Calcutta in those days was not high. And in fact, hardly anyone liked running the half mile, so the record was pretty poor. But a couple of days before sports day, I was feeling out of sorts, and I was considering pulling out. And then I thought, I'll just go for a run in the cool of the early evening and see what sort of form I'm in. So I put on my plimsolls. We didn't have trainers in those days. Put on my plimsolls, borrowed a stopwatch, and went down to the track. It was a grass track. And the markings were already in place. Without even a warm-up, I clicked the stopwatch and started running. To my surprise, I felt terrific, and I leaned into the bends, and I drove harder and harder, and I sprinted up the final straight, ignoring the lactic acid that was building up in my legs, and I crossed the finishing line, and I clicked the stopwatch, and I bent over to catch my breath. And when I looked at the clock, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had just smashed the state record. I had just run the first 2-minute half mile in the state of Bengal, in plimsolls, on grass, with no training. But no one knew. And no one would ever know. Because on sports day, I was so stiff I could hardly run, and I came a distant last. It was a humbling experience. Even though at the prize-giving ceremony at the end, the governor of the state of Bengal commended me as an example of sporting endeavor because I had not quit. Even better, the two beautiful Broughton sisters whom everyone fancied came over and let me know I was now on their radar. Now, fast forward 24 years. Age 42, I entered a race which I didn't win, but which gave me the trophy I cherish more than any of the other trophies I've won for public speaking and anything else. I entered the London Marathon for the first time. And this is the medal they gave me. Now, this time I did some training, but for some reason I couldn't get fully fit. And later I was to find out why. The first few miles were exhilarating. And as I crossed Tower Bridge, I was lifted by my elder brother and his family, the cheering, and I was feeling great. 6 miles further on, I hit the wall. Tank was empty. Nothing left. And I had 8 miles still to run. By the time I got on the embankment, my right leg had seized up and I was limping along. And the final mile took me 11 minutes to cover. And every step was excruciating. And as I crossed the finishing line, I thought, in 3 hours 45, I thought I was going to die. Literally. This medal represents the one occasion when I gave it absolutely everything. Nothing left. I couldn't have done anything better on the day. That's why this matters. Now, I could have actually died. I didn't know it at the time, but I had blocked arteries, which later resulted in a double heart bypass, with one major artery 95% blocked and another one 70% blocked. And when the cardiologist said, you're going to need a heart transplant, and I said, when? He said, next week and don't fly. And I said, is there some alternative? He said, yes, a massive, disabling heart attack. I said, I will take the surgery. So now, in this year's London Marathon, last April, another 42-year-old, Robert Berry, crossed the finishing line, collapsed, and died. Perhaps like me, he suffered pain as he ran the last of those 26 miles. But like me, he decided to give it everything. He couldn't have given any more. And so we come to O. And O is for outcome. You have got to have a focus on an objective. Otherwise, how will you know you have succeeded? In ancient Greece, there was a brilliant orator called Demosthenes. But he wasn't a natural speaker. In fact, he had a terrible stammer. But he had an objective. When his father died when he was very young, and his guardians stole his inheritance. So when he came of age, he decided to sue them, and his friends said, don't do it. Don't do it. You have no knowledge of law, of the legal process. You've got to go and plead your case in the Senate. And it's like a bustling marketplace. If you're not a brilliant speaker, they won't listen to you. And besides, you have a terrible stammer. So Demosthenes went down to the seaside to practice declaiming over the roar of the waves. He filled his mouth with pebbles and he jogged up and down the beach, shouting as he ran. And he developed such a powerful speaking voice that when he went to plead his case in the Senate, he was so impressive, he won his case. He succeeded because he tried. So, what can we learn from that story? We can learn that it is essential to have an objective that is aligned to your personal goal. And then you can succeed. So we come to the final part of pathos, and S stands for self-belief. There's been a story doing the rounds on Facebook and elsewhere recently about a young lady called Jennifer Bicker. You may have come across it. If you haven't, let me briefly summarize it for you. About just over 20 years ago, a baby was born in America and abandoned at the hospital by the parents who didn't want to keep her because she was born with no legs. But the Bickers came along and they said they would adopt her. And they raised her in the same way as they raised their own sons. No special treatment. But there was one rule that applied in their home, one rule that will resonate with Richard McCann. The word can't was not allowed. So she grew up watching sport on television, and by the age of 6 or 7, she was particularly taken with gymnastics. And her hero was a gymnastics champion called Dominique Moschenou. She wanted to be a gymnast like Dominique. So her father went out and got a large trampoline, and he encouraged her to bounce up and down and do somersaults and so forth. She graduated from there to the gym, floor exercises, and she was soon amazing everyone with her gymnastic ability. And by the age of 16, she was the tumbling champion of the state of Illinois. And then one day she asked her mother about her own biological background. And she was astonished to discover she was actually the biological sister of the very woman she had been admiring as a child. She was the biological sister of Dominique Moschenou. Now, that was an extreme example of making the most of an innate ability. Because clearly, Jennifer was born with the same built-in talent for gymnastics as Dominique, but she had that major obstacle to overcome before she could make the most of it. And so I would say her achievements owed more to her efforts than to her innate ability. She succeeded because she tried. What's the next step? The next step is to ask the question, why should people hear that message from you? What makes you the right messenger? Doesn't it depend on what your commitment is to the message? Now, let me tell you about my own commitment to the idea of trying to be the best that you possibly can be. I want you to think about 2 young boys, aged 2 and 3, and their newborn baby sister. Father's away hustling to make some money elsewhere, but he doesn't send any money home to the family, and so times are hard. And eventually the children's mother can't take it anymore. She can't cope. So she takes the children to her husband's uncle who has a shop. She hands the children over and she says, "Tell your nephew these are his children as well. It's time he took responsibility for them. I've had enough." She walks out of the shop, gets a divorce, flies to India where she meets and marries an Indian aristocrat. Meanwhile, her children are being neglected and starved. And a few months later, the baby dies of starvation, and the boys are in bad shape. A friend sends her a telegram with the sad news, so she hurries back. She kidnaps the boys and flies them to India. Unfortunately, her new husband wasn't expecting a built-in family, so he has no idea what to do with them. And he plonks them into a convent boarding school in the foothills of the Himalayas in a town called Kurseong. And they remain in boarding schools for the rest of their childhoods, denied of a normal family life. So what would you expect to happen to those boys? You may think that they would be institutionalized and they would struggle to find their own identities. Well, judge for yourself when I tell you that on Easter Sunday of this year, the younger brother went back to that first boarding school and he told the headmistress, "This is where I started my schooling at the age of 3.5. She was stunned. She looked at my grey hair and marveled at the details I could remember from so long ago, because I was that boy. So, like Jennifer Bicker, we had no close role models or father's footsteps to follow in. We had to rely on ourselves to find out what we were good at and how we would make the most of it. We move now to the third M, which is method. Now, this is about the techniques and the skills that you use to put across your message effectively. I started my public speaking career by joining Toastmasters in 1992. It was only half a year after my first wife had died tragically, so I was deeply traumatized. And my first speech in Toastmasters was the icebreaker. It was about myself. I had to use notes because I couldn't remember anything. It wasn't a great speech, but I decided to work on it. So I set up a camcorder in my living room and I practiced making speeches to my cat. And to play it back, in those days, I had to connect this camcorder to my television set, which wasn't easy. But I worked at it. And 12 months later, I was the Anglo-Irish champion for the first time. And I made one of the best speeches of my career. And why? Because I connected with the audience. I spoke about something that was dear to their hearts. You see, it was in Ireland, and I spoke in defense of the underdog. So connecting with the audience is one of the essentials, the techniques that you need to have. Three others I'll mention briefly are structure, words at work, practice. You see, the structure keeps you and your listeners on track. The right words will produce the emotional response that persuades people to buy into your proposition. But then you've got to practice. You have got to do it. So now, what have I learned from this process that's worth passing on? I've learned that you have to look within yourself to find out something worthwhile to put across. That you have to believe in it, you have to feel connected with it, that own it. And then you have to work on the right way to put that across effectively. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. But you've got to start by looking for something that you really want to do. And one person who did that was William Kamkwamba. William is a young man from Malawi in southern Africa. It's a very poor country. And William came from a poor farming family. And when the famine hit in 2001, William had to leave school at the age of 14. But he was determined to get an education, so he went down to the library and he borrowed some books. He particularly liked the science books. And in one of the books, he found a reference to a windmill. He said he learned a windmill can pump water for irrigation. and generate electricity. But William had no money and no materials. So he went down to a scrapyard, he found whatever he could, and he put together, at the age of 14, with no qualifications, William built a windmill that pumped water onto the parched fields of his father's farm and generated electricity. And people came from miles around to form queues to charge their mobile phones on William's free electricity. He said, I couldn't get rid of them. He became a celebrity. He was invited abroad to speak. He spoke on TED twice. The first time, he was so terrified because he said he had never before been faced with so many white people. And so, as he put it, my English lost. The second time, he was more fluent, and he said, I tried, and I made it. He succeeded because he tried. And so, what is it? What is your because? There is one very simple thing, one very simple way of identifying your specialness, and I recommend it to you, and it is the use of the word because. Write down everything you're good at and add the word because. Write everything you're not good at and write the word because. Write down all the reasons why people like and admire you and add the word because. Write down all the reasons why people do not like you and admire you and write the word because. When you do that, you will very soon have much clearer understanding of who you are and what you have got to offer. Don't believe that you have a talent that will one day propel you to success. Don't believe that that is enough. You have got to put it to the test. You have got to use it to become the best that you can be. You have got to see how that defines you. As the actor Martin Sheen said in a speech a few years ago, we are not asked to do great things, we are asked to do all things with great care. I mean, clearly there could only ever be one person who's the best in the world at anything, but every one of us can be the best version of ourselves. But we have got to make the effort. We have got to try. As my fortune cookie said, you will meet your expectations if you try. So be like William Khan-Panni, the boy who harnessed the wind, and say, I made it because I tried.